Hello everybody, and how are you today? Welcome to windy New Zealand. The noise you can hear in the background is the noise of the wind in the chimney next to my office desk. So, I'm Jev. I read old-fashioned children's stories here 3 times a week. I started last year during the early stages of the COVID lockdown, and I've been doing it on and off ever since. Old-fashioned children's stories because it's lovely to have a different world, a different place, a different time, a different mindset that we can just enjoy for a while. It's one of the reasons why it's a good idea to read bedtime stories. And you don't have to be a child. So, have you got something to drink? Some snacks to eat? And somewhere comfortable to sit? Because I'm going to be reading more from... What am I reading? Go on, you tell me. I better get my book out, eh? That would help if I'm going to be reading you a story, if I actually had the story to read. Anyway, I'm reading Puck of Pook's Hill by Rudyard Kipling, and this is chapter... I don't know which chapter number it is. This book doesn't have the numbers. At least it's got the titles. So, I'm going to just get on with reading it, I think. So, I will start with... This chapter does not start with a song or a poem, which is a surprise. Anyway, it's called Old Men at Pevensey. And I'm really, really sorry if I get drowned out from time to time by the noise of the wind. There's not a lot I can do about it except for move a little closer to the microphone so that I'm louder than the wind. We'll see how we do. Puck of Pook's Hill by Rudyard Kipling, Old Men at Pevensey. Sorry. It has naught to do with apes or devils, Sir Richard went on in an undertone. It concerns D'Aquila, that whom there was never bolder nor craftier, nor more hardy knight born. And remember, he was an old, old man at that time. When? Said Dan. Because we'd ended the last chapter with a song called Thorkild's Song. But it was just after Are the Books True? Sir Richard frowned. Poor false Gilbert, said Sir Richard, if we hang all fellows who write falsely. Why did D'Aquila not begin with Gilbert the clerk? He was false enough. What did he do? He wrote, Is the tale meet for children, think you? Said Sir Richard. He looked at Puck. But tell us, cried Dan and Una together. And then we had Thorkild's song. So we shall actually carry on with what he was going to tell them. Old Men at Pevensey. It has naught to do with apes or devils, Sir Richard went on in an undertone. It concerns D'Aquila, that whom there never was bolder nor craftier nor more hardy knight born. And remember, he was an old, old man at that time. When? Said Dan. When we came back from sailing with Witter. What did you do with your gold? Said Dan. Have patience. Link by link is chainmail made. I will tell all in its place. We bore the gold to Pevensey on horseback. Sorry. Yes, I said hello to the cat. On horseback, 3 loads of it, and then up to the north chamber above the great hall of Pevensey Castle, where D'Aquila lay in winter. He sat on his bed like a little white falcon, turning his head swiftly from one to the other, as we told our tale. Jehan the crab, an old sour man-at-arms, guarded the stairway, but D'Aquila bade him wait at the stair-foot and let down both leather curtains over the door. So this is to cut down the sound travelling through of the story. We don't necessarily want everyone to hear what they're going to talk about. It was Jehan whom D'Aquila had sent to us with the horses, and only Jehan had loaded the gold. When our story was told, D'Aquila gave us the news of England, for we were as men waked from a year-long sleep. The Red King was dead, slain, you remember, the day we set sail, and Henry, his younger brother, had made himself King of England over the head of Robert of Normandy. This was the very thing that the Red King had done to Robert when our great William had died. That's William that we refer to as William the Conqueror. William of Normandy, and a whole other bunch of names like that. I'm just going to move a little globe so it's not going to be where my elbow bumps it. There you go, little globe. Just discovered it in a box. Then Robert of Normandy, mad as d'Aquila said, at twice missing of this kingdom, had sent an army against England, which army had been well beaten back to their ships at Portsmouth a little earlier, and Witter's ship would have rode through them. And now, said d'Aquila, half the great barons of the north and west are out against the king, between Salisbury and Shrewsbury, and half the other half wait to see which way the game shall go. They say Henry is overly English for their stomachs, because he hath married an English wife, and she hath coaxed him to give back their old laws to our Saxons. Better ride a horse on the bit, he knows, I say. Another version of that phrasing would be, better the devil you know. But that is only a cloak to their falsehood. He cracked his finger on the table where the wine was spilt, and thus he spoke. William crammed us Norman barons full of good English acres after St. Lache. I had my share too, he said, and clapped Hugh on the shoulder. But I warned him before Odo rebelled, that he should have bidden the barons give up their lands and lordships in Normandy if they would be English lords. Now they are all but princes, both in England and Normandy, trencher-fed hounds, with a foot in one trough and both eyes on the other. Robert of Normandy has sent them word that if they do not fight for him in England, he will sack and harry out their lands in Normandy. Therefore Clare has risen. Fitz-Osborne has risen. Montgomery has risen, whom our first William made an English earl. Even Darcy is out with his men, whose father I remember, a little hedge-sparrow knight, near by Caen. If Henry wins, the barons can still flee to Normandy, where Robert will welcome them. If Henry loses, Robert, he says, will give them more lands in England. Oh, a pest on Normandy, for she will be our England's curse this many a long year. Amen, said Hugh, but will the war come our ways, do you think? Not from the north, said d'Aquila, but the sea is always open. If the barons gain the upper hand, Robert will send another army into England, for sure, and this time I think he will land here, where his father the Conqueror landed. Ye have brought your pigs to a pretty market. Half England alight, and gold enough on the ground. He stamped on the bars beneath the table, to set every sword in Christendom fighting. What is to do, said Hugh. I have no keep at Dallington, and if we buried it, whom could we trust? Because he has a house at Dallington, he doesn't have a keep, so he doesn't have anywhere that's fortified. Me, said d'Aquila. Pevensey walls are strong. No man but Jehan, who is my dog, knows what is between them. He drew a curtain by the shot window and showed us the shaft of a well in the thickness of the wall. I made it for a drinking well, he said, but we found salt water, and it rises and falls with the tide. Hark! We heard the water whistle and blow at the bottom. So it sounds like it's letting into a sea cave. That's interesting. Juice. Will it serve, said he. Needs must, said Hugh. Our lives are in thy hands. So we lowered all the gold down except one small chest of it by d'Aquila's bed, which we kept as much for his delight in its weight and colour as for any of our needs. In the morning, ere we rode to our manors, he said, I do not say farewell, because ye will return and bide here, not for love nor sorrow, but to be with the gold. Have a care, he said, laughing, lest I use it to make myself pope. Trust me not, but return. Sir Richard paused and smiled sadly. In 7 days, then, we returned from our manors, from the manors which had been ours. So this is Sir Richard telling the story, saying this. In 7 days then we returned from our manors, the manors which had been ours. And were the children quite well? Said Anna. My sons were young. Land and governance belonged by right to young men. Sir Richard was talking to himself. It would have broken their hearts if we had taken back our manors. They had made us great welcome, but we could see, Hugh and I could see, that our day was done. I was a cripple, and he a one-armed man. No, he shook his head, and therefore, he raised his voice, we rode back to Pevensey. I'm sorry, said Una, for the night seemed very sorrowful. Little maid, it all passed long ago. They were young, we were old. We let them rule the manors. Aha! Cried D'Aquila from his shot window when we dismounted. Back again to earth, old foxes. But when we were in his chamber above the hall, he puts his arms about us and says, Welcome, ghosts. Welcome, poor ghosts. Thus it fell out that we were rich beyond belief and lonely. And lonely. What did you do? Said Dan. We watched for Robert of Normandy, said the knight. D'Aquila was like Witter. He suffered no idleness. In fair weather we would ride along between Bexley on the one side to Cuckmere on the other, sometimes with hawk, sometimes with hound. There are stout hares both on the marsh and the downland. So this part of Kent has marshlands. And so there are parts of it that are easy to travel through and parts of it that aren't easy to travel through. That's sometimes part of the defences in the old days, was you would sight something because you had land around it that was hard to cross unless you really knew your way. So we'll see. But always with an eye to the sea, for fear of fleets from Normandy, a fleet of ships. In foul weather he would walk on top of his tower, frowning against the rain, peering here and pointing there. It always vexed him to think how Witter's ship had come and gone without his knowledge. When the wind ceased and ships anchored, to the wharf's edge he would go, and leaning on his sword among the stinking fish, would call to the mariners for their news from France. His other eye he kept landward, for word of Henry's war against the barons. Many brought him news, jongleurs, harps, pedlars, sutlers, priests, and the like, and though he was secret enough in small things, yet if their news misliked him, then, regarding neither time nor place nor people, he would curse our King Henry for a fool or a babe. That may not have been wise. I have heard him cry aloud by the fishing boats, If I were King of England, I would do thus and thus. And when I rode out to see that the warning beacons were laid and dry, he hath often called to me from the shot window, Look to it, Richard, do not copy our blind king, but see with thine own eyes and feel with thine own hands. I do not think he knew any sort of fear. And so we lived at Pevensey in the little chamber above the hall. One foul night came word that a messenger of the king waited below. We were chilled after a long ride in the fog towards Bexley, which is an easy place for ships to land. D'Aquila sent word the man might either eat with us or wait till we had fed. Anon Jehan at the head stair cried that he had called for horse and was gone. Pest on him, cried D'Aquila. I have more to do than to shiver in the great hall for every gadling the king sends. Left he no word? None, said Jehan, except he had been with D'Aquila at St. Lache, except he said that if any old dog could not learn new tricks, it was time to sweep out the kennel. Oh dear, this does not sound good. Oh ho, said D'Aquila, rubbing his nose. To whom did he say that? To his beard, chiefly, but some to his horse's flank as he was girthing up. I followed him out, said Jehan the crab. What was his shield mark? Gold horseshoes on black, said the crab. That is one of Fulk's men, said D'Aquila. Puck broke in very gently. Gold horseshoes on black is not the Fulk's shield. The Fulk's arms are... The knight waved one hand statelily. Thou knowest that evil man's true name, he replied, but I have chosen to call him Fulk because I promised him I would not tell the story of his wickedness so that any man might guess it. I have changed all the names in my tale. his children's children may still be alive. That's considerate. True, true, said Puck, smiling softly. I'm just moving slightly closer to the microphone for you. Okay. It is knightly to keep faith, even after 1,000 years. Sir Richard bowed a little and went on. Gold horseshoes on black, said D'Aquila. I have heard Fulk had joined the barons, and if this is true, our king must be of the upper hand. No matter, all folks are faithless. Still, I would not have sent the man away empty. He fed, said Jehan. Gilbert the clerk fetched him meat and wine from the kitchens. He ate at Gilbert's table. This Gilbert was a clerk from Battle Abbey, who kept the accounts of the manor of Pevensey. He was tall and pale-coloured and carried those new-fashioned beads for counting of prayers. They were large brown nuts or seeds, and hanging from his girdle with his pen and inkhorn, they clashed when he walked. His place was in the great fireplace. There was his table of accounts, and there he lay of nights. He feared the hounds in the hall that came nosing after bones, or to sleep on the warm ashes, and would slash at them with his beads, just like a woman. When D'Aquila sat in hall to do justice, take fines or land grants, Gilbert would so write it in the manor roll, but it was none of his work to feed our guests or to let them depart without his lord's knowledge. Yes, Gilbert may not be on our lord's side, said D'Aquila after Jehan had gone down the stair. Hugh, hast thou ever told my Gilbert thou canst read Latin, hand of right? Oh, that's a good point. No, said Hugh, he is no friend to me, nor to Odo my hound either. No matter, said D'Aquila, let him never know thou canst tell one letter from its fellow. And there he yerked us in the ribs with his scabbard. Watch him, both of ye. There be devils in Africa, and as I have heard, but by the saints, there be greater devils in Pevensey. And that was all he had to say. It sounds like he's got a plan to keep an eye on things by not letting this chap know that he's got someone in his party who can read. Apart from this chap, I'm just going to write down a word because it's one I want to check for another time. Yerk. Y-E-R-K. I think. Yes, yerk. He yerked us in the ribs. It chanced some small I will try that again. It chanced some small while afterwards, a Norman man-at-arms would wed a Saxon wench of the manor, and Gilbert, we had watched him well since D'Aquila spoke, doubted whether her folk were free or slave. Since D'Aquila would give them a field of good land if she were free, the matter came up at the justice in Great Hall before D'Aquila. First the wench's father spoke, then her mother, then all together, till the hall rang and the hounds bayed. D'Aquila held up his hands. Right her free, he called to Gilbert by the fireplace. And God's name, right her free before she deafens me. Yes, yes, he said to the wench that was on her knees at him. Thou art Cerdic's sister, and own cousin to the Lady of Mercia, if thou wilt be silent. In 50 years there will be neither Norman nor Saxon, but all English, said he, and these are the men that do our work. He clapped the man-at-arms that was Jehan's nephew on the shoulder, and kissed the wench, and fretted with his feet among the rushes to show it was finished. The great hall is always bitter cold. I stood at his side. Hugh was behind Gilbert in the fireplace, making play with wise, rough Odo. That's the dog, his dog. He signed to D'Aquila, who bade Gilbert measure the new field for the new couple. Out then runs our Gilbert between man and maid, his beads clashing at his waist, and the hall being empty, we three sit by the fire. Said Hugh, leaning down to the hearthstones, I saw this stone move under Gilbert's foot when Odo snuffled at it. Look. D'Aquila digged in the ashes with his sword. The stone tilted. Beneath it lay a parchment folded, and the writing atop was, Words spoken against the king by our Lord of Pevensey, the second part. Oopsie. Here was set out, Hugh read it to us whispering, every jest D'Aquila had made to us touching the king, Every time he had called out to me from the shot window, and every time he had said what he would do if he were King of England, yes, day by day had his daily speech, which he had never stinted, been set down by Gilbert, tricked out and twisted from its true meaning, yet withal so cunningly that none could deny who knew him that D'Aquila had in some sort spoken those words. Ye see? Dan and Una nodded. Yes, said Una gravely, it isn't what you say so much, it's what you mean by when you say it. Like calling Dan a beast in fun, only grown-ups don't always understand. Sometimes they take things with the literal word meaning, not the intent behind it. You did get yourself a drink and something to eat, didn't you, for when you were listening to the story? I do hope so. I shall carry on. He hath done this day by day before our very face, said D'Aquila. Nay, hour by hour, said Hugh. When D'Aquila spoke even now in the hall of Saxons and Normans, I saw Gilbert write on a parchment which he kept beside the manor roll, that D'Aquila said soon there would be no Normans left in England if his men-at-arms did their work aright. Bones of the saints, said D'Aquila, what avail is honour or a sword against a pen? Where did Gilbert hide that writing? He shall eat it. In his breast when he ran out, said Hugh, which made me look to see where he kept his finished stuff. When Odo scratched at the stone here, I saw his face change. I was sure. He is bold, said D'Aquila. Do him justice, in his own fashion. My Gilbert is bold. Overbold, said Hugh. Hearken here, and he read, Upon the feast of Saint Agatha, our Lord of Pevensey, lying in his upper chamber, being clothed in his second fur gown, reversed with rabbit. Pest on him! He is not my tire-woman, said D'Aquila, and Hugh and I laughed. Reversed with rabbit, seeing a fog over the marshes, did wake Sir Richard Dallingridge, his drunken cupmate. Here they laughed at me, and said, Peer out, old fox, for God is on the Duke of Normandy's side. So did I. It was a black fog. Robert could have landed 10,000 men, and we none the wiser. Does he tell how we were out all day riding the marsh, and how I near perished in a quicksand, and coughed like a sick ewe for 10 days after? Cried D'Aquila. No, said Hugh, but here is the prayer of Gilbert himself to his master Fulk. Ah, said D'Aquila, well, I know it was Fulk. What is the price of my blood? Gilbert prayeth that when our Lord of Pevensey is stripped of his lands on this evidence, which Gilbert hath, with fear and pains collected, fear and pains is a true word, said D'Aquila, and sucked in his cheeks, but how excellent a weapon is a pen, I must learn it. He prays that Fulk will advance him from his present service to that honour in the church which Fulk promised him, and lest Fulk should forget, he has written below to be sacristan of battle. That means something important at the abbey at Battle. At this D'Aquila whistled. A man who can plot against one lord can plot against another. When I am stripped of my lands, Fulk will whip off my Gilbert's foolish head. None the less, Battle needs a new sacristan. They tell me the Abbot Henry keeps no sort of rule there. Let the abbot wait, said Hugh. It is our heads and our lands that are in danger. This parchment is the second part of the tale. The first has gone to Fulk, and so to the king, who will hold us traitors. Assuredly, said D'Aquila. Fulk's man took the first part that evening when Gilbert fed him, and our king is so beset by his brother and his barons, small blame too, that he is mad with mistrust. Fulk has his ear, and pours poison into it. Presently the king gives him my land and yours. This is old. He leaned back and yawned. In other words, this is tiring. It's not the sort of thing I want anymore. And thou wilt surrender Pevensey without word or blow, said Hugh. We Saxons will fight your king then. I will go warn my nephew at Dallington. Give me a horse. Give thee a toy and a rattle, said D'Aquila. Put back the parchment and rake over the ashes. If Fulk has given my Pevensey, which is England's gate, what will he do with it? He is Norman at heart, and his heart is in Normandy, where he can kill peasants at his pleasure. He will open England's gate to our sleepy Robert, as Odo and Mortain tried to do, and then there will be another landing and another St. Lash. Therefore I cannot give up Pevensey. Good, said we too. Ah, but wait, if my king be made, on Gilbert's evidence, to mistrust me, he will send his men against me here, and while we fight, England's gate is left unguarded. Who will be the first to come through thereby? Even Robert of Normandy. Therefore I cannot fight my king. He nursed his sword thus. This is saying and unsaying like a Norman, said Hugh. What of our manners? I do not think for myself, said d'Aquila, nor for our king, nor for your lands. I think for England, for whom neither king nor baron thinks. I am not Norman, Sir Richard, nor Saxon, Sir Hugh. English am I. In other words, he'd given up his claim to being part of the ruling Normans. In his own mind, he was thinking for the good of the place he had become part of. Saxon, Norman or English, said Hugh, our lives are thine, however the game goes. When do we hang Gilbert? Never, said d'Aquila. Who knows, he may yet be sacristan for battle, for, to do him justice, he is a good writer. Dead men make dumb witnesses. Wait. But the king may give Pevensey to Fulk, and our manners go with it, said I. Shall we tell our sons? No, the king will not wake up a hornet's nest in the south till he has smoked out the bees in the north. He may hold me a traitor, but at least he says I am not fighting against him. And every day that I lie still is so much gain to him while he fights the barons. If he were wise, he would wait till that war were over before he made new enemies. But I think Fulk will play upon him to send for me, and if I do not obey the summons, that will, to Henry's mind, be proof of my treason. But mere talk, such as Gilbert sends, is no proof nowadays. We barons follow the church, and like Anselm, we speak what we please. Let us go about our day's dealings and say naught to Gilbert. Then we do nothing, said Hugh. We wait, said d'Aquila. I am old, but still I find that the most grievous work waiting, the most grievous work I know. And so we found it. But in the end, d'Aquila was right. A little later in the year, armed men rode over the hill, the golden horseshoes flying behind the king's banner. Said d'Aquila at the window of our chamber, How did I tell you? Here comes Fulk himself to spy out his new lands, which our king hath promised him, if he can bring proof of my treason. How dost thou know? Said Hugh. Because that is what I would do if I were Fulk. But I should have brought more men. My roan horse to your old shoes, said he. Fulk brings me the king's summons to leave Pevensey and join the war. He sucked in his cheeks and drummed on the edge of the well shaft, where the water sounded all hollow. Shall we go? Said I. Go at this time of year? Stark madness, said he. Take me from Pevensey to Fisk and Flight through fern and forest, and in 3 days Robert's keels would be lying on Pevensey mud with 10,000 men. Who would stop them? Fulk? The horns blew without, and anon Fulk cried the king's summons at the great door, that d'Aquila with all men and horse should join the king's camp at Salisbury. How did I tell you? Said d'Aquila. There are 20 barons betwixt here and Salisbury could give King Henry good land service, but he has been worked upon by Fulk to send south and call me, off the gate of England, when his enemies stand about to batter it in. See that Fulk's men lie in the big south barn, said he. Give them drink, and when Fulk has eaten we will drink in my chamber. The great hall is too cold for old bones. As soon as he was off horse, Fulk went to the chapel with Gilbert to give thanks for his safe coming, and when he had eaten, he was a fat man, and rolled his eyes greedily at our good roast Sussex wheat ears, we led him to the little upper chamber, whither Gilbert had already gone with the manor roll. I remember when Fulk heard the tide blow and whistle in the shaft, he leapt back, and his long down-turned stirrup shoes caught in the rushes, and he stumbled, so that Jehan behind him found it easy to knock his head against the wall. Did you know it was going to happen? Said Dan. Assuredly, said Richard with a sweet smile. I put my foot on his sword and plucked away his dagger, but he knew not whether it was day or night for a while. He lay rolling his eyes and bubbling with his mouth, and Jehan roped him like a calf. He was cased all in that new-fangled armour which we call lizard mail. Not rings like my hauberk here, Richard tapped his chest, but little pieces of dagger-proof steel overlapping on stout leather. So that's scale mail. We stripped it off, no need to spoil good harness by wetting it, and in the neck piece D'Aquila found the same folded piece of parchment which we had put back under the hearthstone. At this, Gilbert would have run out. I laid my hand on his shoulder. It sufficed. He fell to trembling and praying on his beads. Gilbert, said D'Aquila, here be more notable sayings and doings of our Lord of Pevensey for thee to write down. Take pen and inkhorn, Gilbert. We cannot all be sacristans of battle. Said Fulk from the floor, Ye have bound a king's messenger. Pevensey shall burn for this. Maybe I have seen it besieged once, said D'Aquila, but heart up, Fulk. I promise thee that thou shalt be hanged in the middle of the flames at the end of that siege, if I have to share my last loaf with thee, and that is more than Odo would have done when we starved out him and Mortain. Then Fulk sat up and looked long and cunningly at D'Aquila. By the saints, said he, why didst thou not say thou wast on Duke Robert's side at first? Am I? Said D'Aquila. Fulk laughed and said, No man who serves King Henry dare do this much to his messenger. When didst thou come over to the Duke? Let me up and we can smooth it out together. And he smiled and beckoned and winked. So it sounds like Fulk is playing both sides, and that might be why he wants this territory left untended as his own, so that Robert can come in. Maybe he thinks Robert is stronger. What's going to happen? I wonder if Gilbert is writing this down, because they did say we have something better for you to write. Interesting. Let me up and we can smooth it out together. And he smiled and becked and winked. Yes, we will smooth it out, said D'Aquila. He nodded to me and Jehan, and I heaved up Fulk. He was a heavy man, and lowered him into the shaft by a rope, not so as to stand on our gold, but dangling by his shoulders a little above. It was turn of ebb, and the water came to his knees. He said something, but shivered somewhat. Then Jehan of a sudden beat down Gilbert's wrist with his sheathed dagger. Stop, he said, he swallows his beads. Poison belike, said D'Aquila. It is good for men who know too much. I have carried it these 30 years. Give me. So D'Aquila has carried poison for himself if he needs it. Then Gilbert wept and howled. D'Aquila ran the beads through his fingers. The last one, I have said that they were large nuts, opened in two halves on a pin, and there was a small folded parchment within. On it was written, The old dog goes to Salisbury to be beaten. I have his kennel. Come quickly. The old dog being King Henry, I suppose. This is worse than poison, said D'Aquila very softly, and sucked in his cheeks. Then Gilbert grovelled in the rushes and told us all he knew. The letter, as we guessed, was from Fulk to the Duke, and not the first that had passed between them. Fulk had given it to Gilbert in the chapel, and Gilbert thought to have taken it by morning to a certain fishing boat at the wharf, which trafficked between Pevensey and the French shore. Gilbert was a false fellow, but he found time between his quakings and shakings to swear that the master of the boat knew nothing of the matter. He hath called me shaved head, said Gilbert, and he hath thrown haddock guts at me, but for all that he is no traitor. I will have no clerk of mine mishandled or miscalled, said D'Aquila. That seaman shall be whipped at his own mast. Write me first a letter, and thou shalt bear it with the order for the whipping, tomorrow to the boat. At this Gilbert would have kissed D'Aquila's hand. He had not hoped to live until the morning, and when he trembled less he wrote a letter as from Fulk to the Duke, saying that the kennel, which signified Pevensey, was shut, and that the old dog, which was de Quilla, sat outside it, and moreover, all had been betrayed. So it's the same style of letter, but stating the opposite. Write to any man that all is betrayed, said de Quilla, and even the Pope himself would sleep uneasily. Jehan, if one told thee all was betrayed, what wouldst thou do? I would run away, said Jehan. It might be true. Well said, quoth Aquila. Write Gilbert that Montgomery, the great earl, hath made his peace with the king, and that little Darcy, whom I hate, hath been hanged by the heels. We will give Robert full measure to chew upon. Write also that Fulk himself is sick to death of a dropsy. Nay, cried Fulk, hanging in the well shaft, drown me out of hand, but do not make a jest of me. So he doesn't want them to make fun of him, he'd rather be dead. Jest, said de Quilla. A jest, said de Quilla. I am but fighting for life and lands with a pen, as thou hast shown me, Fulk. Then Fulk groaned, for he was cold, and let me confess, said he. Now, this is right neighbourly, said de Quilla, leaning over the shaft. Thou hast read my sayings and doings, or at least the first part of them, and thou art minded to repay me with thine own doings and sayings. Take pen and inkhorn, Gilbert. Here is work that will not irk thee. Writing, that's what you're used to. Let my men go without hurt, and I will confess my treason against the king, said Fulk. Now, why has he grown so tender of his men of a sudden, said Hugh to me, for Fulk had no name for mercy to his men. Plunder he gave them, but pity none. Tay, said de Quilla, thy treason was all confessed long ago by Gilbert. It would be enough to hang Montgomery himself. Nay, but spare my men, said Fulk, and we heard him splash like a fish in a pond, for the tide was rising. All in good time, said de Quilla. The night is young, the wine is old, and we need only the merry tale. Begin the story of thy life, since when thou wast a lad at Tours. Tell it nimbly. Ye shame me to my soul, said Fulk. Then I have done what neither king nor duke could do, said de Quilla. But begin, and forget nothing. Send thy man away, said Fulk. That much I can do, said de Quilla. But remember, I am like the Danes' king. I cannot turn the tide. How long will it rise, said Fulk, and splashed anew. For 3 hours, said de Quilla. Time to tell all thy good deeds. Begin. And Gilbert, I have heard thou art somewhat careless. Do not twist his words from his true meaning. So, fear of death in the dark being upon him, Fulk began, and Gilbert, not knowing what his fate might be, wrote it word by word. I have heard many tales, but never heard I aught to match the tale of Fulk, his black life, as Fulk told it hollowly, hanging in the shaft. Was it bad? Said Dan, awestruck. Beyond belief, Sir Richard answered. None the less there was that in it which forced even Gilbert to laugh. We three laughed till we ached. At one place his teeth so chattered that we could not well hear, and we reached him down a cup of wine. Then he warmed to it and smoothly set out all his shifts, malices, and treacheries, his extreme boldnesses. He was desperate bold, his retreats, his shufflings, and counterfeitings. He was also inconceivably a coward. His lack of gear and honour, his despair at their loss, his remedies and well-coloured contrivances. Yes, he waved the filthy rags of his life before us, as though they had been some proud banner. When he ceased, we saw by torches that the tide stood at the corners of his mouth, and he breathed strongly through his nose. We had him out and rubbed him. We wrapped him in a cloak and gave him wine, and we leaned and looked upon him the while he drank. He was shivering, but shameless. Of a sudden we heard Jehan at the stairway wake, but a boy pushed past him and stood before us, the hall rushes in his hair, all slubbered with sleep. My father, I dreamed of treachery, he cried and babbled thickly. There is no treachery here, said Fulk. Go. And the boy turned, even then not fully awake, and Jehan led him by the hand to the great hall. Thy only son, said de Quilla. Why didst thou bring the child here? He is my heir. I dared not trust him to my brother, said Fulk, and now he was ashamed. D'Aquila said nothing, but sat weighing a wine cup in his 2 hands, thus. Anon Fulk touched him on the knee. Let the boy escape to Normandy, said he, and do with me at thy pleasure. Yea, hang me tomorrow with my letter to Robert round my neck, but let the boy go. Be still, said D'Aquila. I think for England. So we waited what our Lord Pevensey should devise, and the sweat ran down Fulk's forehead. At last, said D'Aquila, I am too old to judge. At last, said D'Aquila, I am too old to judge, or to trust any man. I do not covet thy lands as thou hast coveted mine, and whether thou art any better or any worse than any other black Angevin thief, it is for thy king to find out. Therefore go back to thy king, Fulk. And thou wilt say nothing of what is past, said Fulk. Why should I? Thy son will stay with me. If the king calls me again to leave Pevensey, which I must guard against England's enemies, if the king sends his men against me for a traitor, or if I hear that the king in his bed thinks any evil of me or my knights, thy son will be hanged from out this window, Fulk. In other words, where he can be seen to be hanging, dead and humiliated, hung in public. But it hasn't anything to do with his son, cried Una, startled. How could we have hanged Fulk? Said Sir Richard. We needed him to make our peace with the king. He would have betrayed half England for the boy's sake. Of that we were sure. Now, just a wee point, he didn't trust anyone to keep his son safe back where he was coming from, because he knew what he himself was like. And so he judges others on the basis of what he himself is like, even though he sets himself above them. He would have betrayed half England for the boy's sake, of that we were sure, said Sir Richard. I don't understand, said Una, but I think it's simply awful. So did not Fulk. He was well pleased, because he thinks he's going to be surviving, therefore. What, because his son was going to be killed? Nay, because Aquila had shown him how he might save the boy's life, and his own lands, and honours. I will do it, he said. I swear I will do it. I will tell the king thou art no traitor, but the most excellent, valiant, and perfect of us all. Yes, I will save thee. D'Aquila looked still into the bottom of the cup, rolling the wine dregs to and fro. Ay, he said, if I had a son, I would, I think, save him. But do not by any means tell me how thou wilt go about it. Nay, nay, said Fulk, holding his bald head wisely. That is my secret. But rest at ease, D'Aquila. No hair of thy head nor rood of thy land shall be forfeited. And he smiled like one planning great good deeds. And henceforward, said D'Aquila, I counsel thee to serve one master, not 2. What, said Fulk, can I work no more honest trading between the 2 sides these troublous times? Ah, there's where it comes. He was making money off both sides of the game. Serve Robert or the king, England or Normandy, said D'Aquila. I care not which it is, but make thy choice here and now. The king, then, said Fulk, for I see he is better served than Robert. Shall I swear it? No need, said D'Aquila, and he laid his hand on the parchments which Gilbert had written. It shall be some part of my Gilbert's penance, to copy out the savoury tale of thy life, till we have made 10, 20, and 100, maybe, copies. How many cattle, think you, would the Bishop of Tours give for that tale? That's Tours over in France, Normandy. Or thy brother, or the monks of Blois? Minstrels will turn it into songs which thine own Saxon serfs shall sing behind the plough stilts, and men-at-arms riding through thy Norman towns. From here to Rome, Fulk, men will make very merry over that tale, and how Fulk told it, hanging in a well like a drowned puppy. This shall be thy punishment, if ever I find thee double-dealing with thy king any more. Meantime, the parchment stays here with thy son. Him I will return to thee when thou hast made my peace with the king. The parchments never by having more than one copy. That prevents him from trying to destroy it. Fulk hid his face and groaned. Sounds like he was thinking of that as a possibility. Bones of the saints, said D'Aquila, laughing. The pen cuts deep. I could never have fetched that grunt out of thee with any sword. But so long as I do not anger thee, my tale will be secret, said Fulk. Just so long. Does that comfort thee, Fulk? Said D'Aquila. What other comfort have ye left me? He said, and of a sudden he wept hopelessly like a child, dropping his face to his knees. Poor Fulk, said Una. I pitied him also, said Sir Richard. After the spur, corn, said D'Aquila, and he threw Fulk 3 wedges of gold that he had taken from our little chest by the bed place. So after the punishment, the reward, effectively, or the encouragement. If I had known this, said Fulk, catching his breath, I would never have lifted hand against Pevensey. Only lack of this yellow stuff has made me so unlucky in my dealings. It wouldn't have, actually. He would have tried to get more. It was dawn then, and they stirred in the great hall below. We sent down Fulk's mail to be scoured, and when he rode away at noon under his own and the king's banner, very splendid and stately did he show. He smoothed his long beard, and called his son to his stirrup, and kissed him. D'Aquila rode with him as far as the new mill landward. We thought the night had been all a dream. But did he make it right with the king? Dan asked. About your not being traitors, I mean. Sir Richard smiled. The king sent no second summons to Pevensey, nor did he ask why D'Aquila did not obey the first. Yes, that was Fulk's work. I know not how he did it, but it was well and swiftly done. Then you didn't do anything to his son, said Una. The boy? Oh, he was an imp. He turned the keep doors out of dortoirs while we had him. He sang foul songs learned in the baron's camps, poor fool. He set the hounds fighting in the hall. He lit the rushes to drive out, as he said, the fleas. He drew his dagger on Jehan, who threw him down the stairway for it, and he rode his horse through crops and among sheep. But when we had beaten him and showed him wolf and deer, he followed us old men like a young eager hound, and called us uncle. His father came the summer's end to take him away, but the boy had no lust to go because of the otter hunting, and he stayed on till the fox hunting. I gave him a bitten's claw to bring him good luck at shooting. An imp, if ever there was. So it sounds like he'd been a rather spoilt brat, and he learnt a little bit about how he should be, and also discovered that other things are fun. And what happened to Gilbert, said Dan. Not even a whipping. D'Aquila said he would sooner a clerk, however false, that knew the manor roll, than a fool, however true, that must be taught his work afresh. Moreover, after that night, I think Gilbert loved as much as he feared D'Aquila. At least he would not leave us, not even when Vivian, the king's clerk, would have made him sacristan of Battle Abbey. A false fellow, but in his fashion, bold. So he understood that being where he was actually a better position than taking responsibility somewhere else. Did Robert ever land in Pevensey after all? Dan went on. We guarded the coast too well while Henry was fighting as barons, and 3 or 4 years later, when England had peace, Henry crossed to Normandy and showed his brother some work at Tenchebrai that cured Robert of fighting. Many of Henry's men sailed from Pevensey to that war. Fulk came, I remember, and we all 4 lay in the little chamber once again and drank together. D'Aquila was right. One should not judge men. Fulk was merry, yes, always merry, with a catch in his breath. And what did you do afterward? Said Una. We talked together of times past. That is all men can do when they grow old, little maid. The bell rang for tea. The bell for tea rang faintly across the meadows. Dan lay in the bows of the Golden Hind, that's their dinghy from the pond. Una, in the stern, the book of verses open in her lap, was reading from The Slave's Dream. Again in the mist and shadow of sleep he saw his native land. I don't know when you began that, said Dan sleepily. Oh, okay, so here we go. That is all that men can do when they grow old, little maid. Obviously, there's a slight pause there in the story, and you hear the bell ring, and the children are in the dinghy. I don't know when you began that, said Dan sleepily. On the middle thwart of the boat, beside Una's sunbonnet, lay an oak leaf, an ash leaf, and a thorn leaf that must have dropped down from the trees above, and the brook giggled as though it had just seen some joke. Because those leaves together, when they come from Puck, apparently help you to forget what you have just been hearing. So Puck and Sir Robert have enjoyed telling this story to the children of what had happened in Sir Robert's day. But then, so that the children don't tell people in such a way that they think there's something wrong with the children, they forget. They'll probably remember later when they're older. And now we have one of the poems or songs. The runes on Welland's sword. A smith makes me to betray my man in my first fight. To gather gold at the world's end I am sent. The gold I gather comes into England out of deep water. Like a shining fish, then it descends into deep water. It is not given for goods or gear, but for the thing. The gold I gather a king covets for an ill use. The gold I gather is drawn up out of deep water. Like a shining fish, then it descends into deep water. It is not given for gods or gear, but for the thing. So there you go. That's the end of that chapter. Shall we have another? I think so. If you can put up with the noise of the wind in my chimney. So, I'm reading Puck of Pook's Hill by Rudyard Kipling. I am Jev in New Zealand, and we are going to have the next chapter, which is called A Centurion of the 30th. Now, I'm not sure if this is chapter 5, maybe. I would have to work that one out. Anyway, it's my third day reading from Puck of Pook's Hill, and you're most welcome to come back and hear some more another time after today, or listen to the playlist on YouTube when it comes out over there. Anyway, so A Centurion of the 30th. So I'm thinking we're now going to get a different time period, not Sir Richard's one, because Puck is sharing the history, snippets of the history of England with these children, Dan and Una. A Centurion of the 30th, which is a poem. Cities and thrones and powers stand in time's eyes, almost as long as flowers which daily die, but as new buds put forth to glad new men, out of the spent and unconsidered earth, the cities rise again. The season's daffodil she never hears, what change, what chance, what chill, cut down last year's, but with bold countenance and knowledge small, esteems her 7 days' continuance to be perpetual. So time that is o'erkind to all that be, ordains us in as blind, as bold as she, that in our very death and burial sure, shadow to shadow well persuaded saith, see how our works endure. And now to the story. Dan had come to grief over his Latin, and was kept in, so Una went alone to fire wood. Dan's big catapult, and the lead bullets that Hobden had made him. Bullets we think of as being something that have gunpowder behind them to push them. A bullet traditionally is actually the round, the projectile, the thing that is going to be doing the hitting, whatever. So that means if you're using a catapult, that can be the weighted thing that you put in the catapult to send on its way. Just explaining weird words. Dan's big catapult and the lead bullets that Hobden had made for him were hidden in an old hollow beech stub on the west of the wood. They had named the place out of the verse in Lays of Ancient Rome. From lordly Volaterra, where scowls the far-famed hold, piled by the hands of giants for godlike kings of old. They were the godlike kings, and when old Hobden piled some comfortable brushwood between the big wooden knees of Volaterra, they called him Hands of Giants. Hobden being the chap who works around the property. The weights would have been a little bit like a lead fishing sinker, but without the hole through the middle, the round ones. Una slipped through their private gap in the fence and sat still a while, scowling as scowlily and lordily as she knew how, for Volaterra is an important watchtower that juts out of far wood, just as far wood juts out of the hillside. Pook's Hill lay below her, and all the turns of the brook as it wanders out of the Willingford woods. You can check the layout on the maps and see if it looks anything like this. Find Bateman's. It's a house in southern England, and then look to the south for Pook's Hill. It's not labelled as such, but it's a distinctive hill that the house at Bateman's looks towards, and then there's woods up behind it. See if you can find anything that looks like it. And then maybe in Discord you can write down where you found it. Here we go. Pook's Hill lay below her, and all the turns of the brook as it wanders out of the Willingford woods, between hop gardens to old Hobden's cottage at the forge. The sou'west wind, there is always a wind by Volaterra, blew from the bare ridge where Cherry Clack windmill stands. So it's near a windmill too, or used to be. Now wind prowling through woods sounds like exciting things going to happen, and that is why on blowy days you stand up in Volaterra and shout bits of the lays to suit its noises. The lays is Latin poetry, I think. Didn't do Latin, don't ask me. Una took Dan's catapult from its secret place and made ready to meet Lars Porsenna's army, stealing through the wind-whitened aspens by the brook. A gust boomed up the valley, and Una chanted sorrowfully, Verbenna down to Ostia hath wasted all the plain, Astur hath stormed Janiculum, and the stout guards are slain. But the wind, not charging fair to the wood, started aside and shook a single oak in Gleeson's pasture. Here it made itself all small and crouched among the grasses, waving the tips of them as a cat waves the tip of her tail before she springs. Now welcome, welcome, Sextus, sang Una, loading the catapult. Now welcome to thy home. Why dost thou stay and turn away? Here lies the road to Rome. She fired into the face of the lull to wake up the cowardly wind, and heard a grunt from behind a thorn in the pasture. Oh, my Winky, she said aloud, and that was something she had picked up from Dan. I believe I've tickled up a Gleeson cow. You little painted beast, a voice cried. I'll teach you to sling your masters. She looked down most cautiously, and under a young man covered with hoopy bronze armour, all glowing among the late broom. No, and saw a young man. But what Una admired beyond all was his great bronze helmet, with a red horsetail that flicked in the wind. She could hear the long hairs rasp on his shimmery shoulder plates. What does the faun mean, he said half aloud to himself, by telling me that the painted people have changed? He caught sight of Una's yellow head. Have you seen a painted lead slinger? He called. I was going to explain, but I think we will have the story explain it for us. No, said Una, but if you've seen a bullet... Seen? Cried the man. It passed within a hair's breadth of my ear. Well, that was me. I'm most awfully sorry. Didn't the faun tell you I was coming? He smiled. Not if you mean Puck. I thought you were a Gleeson cow. I didn't know you were a... What are you? He laughed outright, showing a set of splendid teeth. His face and eyes were dark, and his eyebrows met above his big nose in one bushy black bar. Strong nose, dark eyes. They call me Parnesius. I have been a centurion of the 7th cohort of the 30th Legion, the Ulpia Victrix. Did you sling that bullet? I did. I was using Dan's catapult, said Una. Catapults, said he. I ought to know something about them. Show me. He leapt the rough fence with a rattle of spear, shield and armour, and hoisted himself into Volaterra as quickly as a shadow. A sling on a forked stick. I understand, he cried, and pulled at the elastic. But what wonderful beast yields the stretching leather? Have you guessed yet? It's lackey, elastic. You put the bullet into that loop and then you pull hard. The man pulled and hit himself square on his thumbnail. Each to his own weapon, he said gravely, handing it back. I am better with the bigger machine, little maiden, but it's a pretty toy. A wolf would laugh at it. Aren't you afraid of wolves? There aren't any, said Una. Never believe it. A wolf's like a winged hat. He comes when he isn't expected. Don't they hunt wolves here? We don't hunt, said Una, remembering what she had heard from grown-ups. We preserve pheasants. Do you know them? I ought to, said the young man, smiling again, and he imitated the cry of the cock pheasant so perfectly that a bird answered out of the wood. What a big painted clucking fool is a pheasant, he said, just like some Romans. But you're a Roman yourself, aren't you? Said Una. Yes and no. I'm one of a good few thousand who have never seen Rome except in a picture. My people have lived at Victus for generations. Victus, that island west yonder that you can see from so far in clear weather. Do you mean the Isle of Wight? It lifts up just before rain and you can see it from the downs. Very likely. Our villa's on the south edge of the island by the broken cliffs. Most of it is 300 years old, but the cow stables, where our first ancestor lived, must be 100 years older. Oh, quite that, because the founder of our family had his land given to him by Agricola at the settlement. It's not a bad little place for its size. In springtime, violets grow down to the very beach. I've gathered seaweeds for myself and violets for my mother, many a time with our old nurse. Was your nurse a Romaness too? No, a Numidian. Gods be good to her, a dear fat brown thing with a tongue like a cowbell. She was a free woman, by the way. Are you free, maiden? Oh, quite, said Una. At least till tea time, and in summer our governess doesn't say much if we're late. He means, are you a slave or are you a free person? She means, are you busy and engaged in something and required to do it, or are you free to do what you want? The young man laughed again, a proper, understanding laugh. I see, said he, that accounts for your being in the wood. We hid among the cliffs. As a child. Did you have a governess then? Did we not? A Greek too. She had a way of clutching her dress when she hunted us among the gorse bushes that made us laugh. Then she'd say she'd get us whipped. She never did. Sorry if I'm making too much noise with my microphone, but I'm trying to get it a little closer to me so that I'm a little bit louder than the noise in the chimney. She hunted us among the gorse bushes that made us laugh. Then she'd say she'd get us whipped. She never did, though, bless her. Aglaia was a thorough sportswoman for all her learning. So she was practical as well as being theoretical. But what lessons did you do when you were little? Ancient history, the classics, arithmetic, and so on, he answered. My sister and I were thick heads, but my two brothers, I'm the middle one, liked those things. And of course my mother was clever enough for any 6. She was nearly as tall as I am, and she looked like the new statue on the Western Road, the Demeter of the baskets, you know. It's obviously something that was well known to him, and he expected her to know it. The Demeter of the baskets, you know, and funny. Roma dear, how mother could make us laugh. What at? Little jokes and sayings that every family has, don't you know? I know we have, but I didn't know other people had them too, said Una. Tell me all about your family, please. Good families are very much alike. Mother would sit spinning of evenings while Aglaia read in her corner, and father did accounts, and we 4 romped about the passages. When our noise grew too loud, the pater would say, less tumult, less tumult. Have you never heard of a father's right over his children? He can slay them, my loves, slay them dead, and the gods highly approve of the action. Then mother would prim up her dear mouth over the wheel and answer, I'm afraid there can't be much of the Roman father about you. Then the pater would roll up his accounts and say, I'll show you. And then he'd be worse than any of us. Fathers can, if they like, said Una, her eyes dancing. Didn't I say all good families were very much the same? What did you do in summer, said Una. Play about, like us? Yes, we visited our friends. There are no wolves in Vectis. We had many friends and as many ponies as we wished. It must have been lovely, said Una. I hope it lasted forever. Not quite, little maid. When I was about 16 or 17, the father felt gouty, and we all went to the waters. What waters? At Aquasulis. Everyone goes there. You ought to get your father to take you some day. But where? I don't know, said Una. The young man looked astounded for a moment. Aquasulis, he repeated. The best baths in Britain. Just as good, I'm told, as Rome. All the old gluttons sit in hot water and talk scandal and politics, and the generals come through the streets with their guards behind them, and the magistrates come in their chairs with their stiff guards behind them, and you meet fortune-tellers and goldsmiths and merchants and philosophers and feather-sellers and ultra-Roman Britons and ultra-British Romans and tame tribesmen pretending to be civilized and Jewish lecturers and, everybody interesting. We young people, of course, took no interest in politics. We had not the gout. There were many of our age like us. We did not find life sad. But while we were enjoying ourselves without thinking, my sister met the son of a magistrate in the West, and a year afterwards she was married to him. My young brother, who was always interested in plants and roots, met the first doctor of a legion from the city of the legions, and he decided he would be an army doctor. I do not think it is a profession for a well-born man, but then I am not my brother. He went to Rome to study medicine, and now he's first doctor of a legion in Egypt, the Antino, I think, but I have not heard from him for some time. My eldest brother came across a Greek philosopher and told my father that he intended to settle down on the estate as a farmer and a philosopher. You see, the young man's eyes twinkled, his philosopher was a long-haired one. Modern terminology he would have been considered to be. I thought philosophers were bald, said Una. Not at all. She was very pretty. I don't blame him. Nothing could have suited me better than my eldest brother's doing this, for I was only too keen to join the army. I had always feared I should have to stay home and look after the estate while my brother took this. He rapped on his great glistening shield that never seemed to be in his way. So obviously in those days the oldest son, or the next oldest, would go into the army and take up position if you were of a family of position. And because they had wanted to do something different, that gave him the opportunity. And I forgot to say to you, when we were having the chapter break, have your drink of water and have your snack. Although you can do it when you're listening anyway, that's okay. But it's usually what I do. So I make sure that I have some. So I'm going to do it now. So we were well contented, we young people, and we rode back to Clausentum along the wood road, very quietly. But when we reached home, Aglaia, our governess, saw what had come to us. I remember her at the door, the torch over her head, watching us climb the cliff path from the boat. Aye, aye, she said, children, you went away, men and a young woman you return. Then she kissed mother, and mother wept. Thus our visit to the waters settled our fates for each of us, maiden. He rose to his feet and listened, leaning on the shield rim. I think that's Dan, my brother, said Una. Yes, and the fawn is with him, he replied, as Dan with Puck stumbled through the copse. We should have come sooner, Puck called, but the beauties of your native tongue, O Panisius, have enthralled this young citizen. Because Dan's been having Latin lessons, and Romans speak Latin. So that's the beauties of Panisius's native tongue. Panisius looked bewildered, even when Una explained. Dan said the plural of dominus was dominos, and when Miss Blake said it wasn't, he said he supposed it was backgammon, another game. And so he had to write it out twice, for cheek, you know. Dan had climbed into Volaterra. hot and panting. "I've run nearly all the way," he gasped, "and then Puck met me. How do you do, sir?" "I am in good health," Panisius answered. "See, I have tried to bend the bow of Ulysses, but," he held up his thumb. "I'm sorry, you must have pulled off too soon," said Dan, "but Puck said you were telling Una a story." "Continue, O Panisius," said Puck, who had perched himself on a dead branch above them. "I will be the chorus. Has he puzzled you much, Una?" "Not a bit, except I didn't know where Ac something was," she answered. "Oh, Aquasulis. That's Bath, where the buns come from, Bath buns." Let the hero tell his own tale. I did wonder if that was Bath, but I wasn't going to tell you. Panisius threatened to thrust his spear at Puck's legs, but Puck reached down, caught at the horsetail plume on his helmet, and pulled off the tall helmet. "Thanks, Jester," said Panisius, shaking his curly dark head. "That is cooler. Now, hang it up for me." "I was telling your sister how I joined the army," he said to Dan. "Did you have to pass an exam?" Dan asked eagerly. "No, I went to my father and I said I should like to enter the Dacian horse. I had seen some at Aquasulis, but he said I'd better begin service in a regular legion from Rome. Now, like many of our youngsters, I was not too fond of anything Roman. The Roman-born officers and magistrates looked down on us British-born folk as though we were barbarians. I told my father so. I know they do, he said, but remember, after all, we are the people of the old stock, and our duty is to the empire." "To which empire?" I replied. "We split the eagle before I was born." "What thieves' talk is that?" said my father. He hated slang. "Well, sir," I said, "we've one emperor in Rome, and I don't know how many emperors the outlying provinces have set up from time to time. Which am I to follow?" Because, yes, that's true. In Roman history, they did divide the empire up. "Gratian," he said. "At least he's a sportsman." "He's all that," I said. "Hasn't he turned himself into a raw beef-eating Scythian?" "Where did you hear of it?" said the pater. "At Aquasulis," I said. It was perfectly true. This precious Emperor Gratian of ours had a bodyguard of fur-cloaked Scythians, and he was so crazy about them that he dressed like them. In Rome, of all places in the world. Italy, Rome, very hot. Don't need skins, not fur cloaks. It was as bad as if my own father had painted himself blue. Blue. I wonder if the story's going to explain that. I'll leave it for now, and we'll see if we can find out. "No matter for the clothes," said the pater. "They're only the fringe of the trouble. It began before your time or mine. Rome has forsaken her gods and must be punished. The great war with the painted people broke out in the very year the temples of our gods were destroyed. We beat the painted people in the very year our temples were rebuilt. Go back further still," he went back to the time of Diocletian, "and to listen to him you would have thought eternal Rome herself was on the edge of destruction, just because a few people had become a little large-minded. I knew nothing about it. Aglaia had never taught us the history of our own country. She was so full of her ancient Greeks." "There is no hope for Rome," said the pater at last. "She has forsaken her gods. But if the gods forgive us here, we may save Britain. To do that, we must keep the painted people back. Therefore, I tell you, Panisius, as a father, that if your heart is set on service, your place is among men on the wall, and not with women among the cities." "What wall?" asked Dan and Una at once. "Father meant the one we call Hadrian's Wall. I'll tell you about it later. It was built long ago across North Britain to keep out the painted people. The Picts, you call them. Father had fought in the Great Pict War that lasted more than 20 years, and he knew what fighting meant. Theodosius, one of our great generals, had chased the little beasts back far into the north before I was born. Down at Vectus, of course, we never troubled our heads about them, because that's completely the opposite end of the country. The wall is in that direction, and Vectus is in that direction. Scotland. Hadrian's Wall runs across the base of Scotland. Vectis, the Isle of Wight, southern England, south coast, opposite ends of the country. So no wonder he hasn't heard anything about it. It's not part of his day-to-day life. Where was I? Down at Vectis, of course, we never troubled our heads about them, but when my father spoke as he did, I kissed his hand and waited for orders. We British-born Romans know what is due our parents. So he showed him respect. If I kissed my father's hand, he'd laugh, said Dan. Customs change. But if you do not obey your father, the gods remember it. You may be quite sure of that. After our talk, seeing I was in earnest, the pater sent me over to Clausentum to learn my foot drill in a barrack full of foreign auxiliaries, as unwashed and unshaved a mob of mixed barbarians as ever scrubbed a breastplate. It was your stick in their stomachs and your shield in their faces to push them into any sort of formation. When I had learned my work, the instructor gave me a handful, and they were a handful of Gauls and Iberians to polish up till they were sent to their stations up country. I did my best, and one night a villa in the suburbs caught fire, and I had my handful out and at work before any of the other troops. I noticed a quiet-looking man on the lawn leaning on a stick. He watched us passing buckets from the pond, and at last he said to me, "Who are you?" "A probationer waiting for a command," I answered. I didn't know who he was from Deucalion. "Born in Britain," he said. "Yes, if you were born in Spain," I said, for he neighed his words like an Iberian mule. "And what might you call yourself when you are at home?" he said, laughing. "It depends," I answered. "Sometimes one thing and sometimes another, but now I'm busy." He's trying to put out the fire and this guy wants to chat. He said no more till we had saved the family gods. They were respectable householders. And then he grunted across the laurels, "Listen, young something, sometimes one thing and sometimes another. In future, call yourself centurion of the 7th cohort of the 30th, the Ulpia Victrix. That will help me to remember you. Your father and a few others call me Maximus." He tossed me the polished stick he was leaning on and went away. "You might have knocked me down with it." "Who was he?" said Dan. "Maximus himself, our great general. The general of Britain who had been Theodosius's right hand on the Pict War. Not only had he given me my centurion's stick direct, but 3 steps in a good legion as well." In other words, he'd actually put him in place, given him authority. "A new man generally begins in the 10th cohort of his legion and works up." 7th cohort. So you start at the 10th and you work your way forwards in the numbers. "And were you pleased?" said Una. "Very. I thought Maximus had chosen me for my good looks and fine style in marching, but when I went home the pater told me he had served under Maximus in the Great Pict War and had asked him to befriend me." "A child you were," said Puck from above. "I was," said Parnesius. "Don't begrudge it me, Fawn. Afterwards the gods know I put aside the games." And Puck nodded, brown chin on brown hand, his big eyes still. "The night before I left we sacrificed to our ancestors, the usual little home sacrifice, but I never prayed so earnestly to all the good shades, and then I went with my father by boat to Regnum, and across the chalk eastwards to Anderia yonder." "Regnum? Anderia?" The children turned their faces to Puck. "Regnum's Chichester," he said, pointing towards Cherry Clack. That's the direction of Chichester from where they are. "And," he threw his arm south behind him, "Andaria's Pevensey." "Pevensey again," said Dan. "Where Welland landed." "Welland and a few others," said Puck. "Pevensey isn't young, even compared to me." The headquarters of the 30th lay at Anderia in summer, but my own cohort, the 7th, was on the wall up north. Maximus was inspecting auxiliaries, the Abulci, I think, at Anderia, and we stayed with him, for he and my father were very old friends. I was only there 10 days when I was ordered to go up with 30 men to my cohort. He laughed merrily. "A man never forgets his first march," he said. I was happier than any emperor when I led my handful through the north gate of the camp, and we saluted the guard and the altar of victory there. How? Said Dan and Una. Panesius smiled and stood up, flashing in his armour. So, said he, and he moved slowly through the beautiful movements of the Roman salute. That ends with a hollow clang of the shield coming into its place between the shoulders. Hi, said Puck, that sets one thinking. We went out fully armed, said Panesius, sitting down, but as soon as the road entered the great forest, my men expected the pack horses to hang their shields on. No, I said, you can dress like women at Andrea, but when you're with me you will carry your own weapons and armour. But it's hot, said one of them, and we haven't a doctor. Suppose we get sunstroke or a fever. Then die, said I, and a good riddance to Rome. Up shield, up spears, and tighten your footwear. Don't think yourself Emperor of Britain already, the fellow shouted. I knocked him over with the butt of my spear and explained to these Roman-born Romans that if there were any further trouble, we should go on with one man short. And by the light of the sun, I meant it too. My raw Gauls at Clausentum had never treated me so. Then, quietly as a cloud, Maximus rode out of the fern, my father behind him, and reined up across the road. He wore the purple as though he were already emperor. His leggings were of white buckskin laced with gold. My men dropped like partridges. He said nothing for some time, only looked with his eyes puckered. Then he crooked his forefinger, and my men crawled, to one side. Stand in the sun, children, he said, and they formed up on the hard road. What would you have done, he said to me, if I had not been here? I should have killed that man, I said. Kill him now, he said, he will not move a limb. No, said I, you have taken my men out of my command. I should only be your butcher if I killed him now. Do you see what I mean? Panesius turned to Dan. Yes, said Dan, it wouldn't have been fair somehow. That's what I thought, said Panesius, but Maximus frowned. You'll never be an emperor, he said, not even a general will you be. I was silent, but my father seemed pleased. I came here to see the last of you, he said. You have seen it, said Maximus. I shall never need your son any more. He will live and he will die, an officer of a legion, and he might have been prefect of one of my provinces. Now eat and drink with us, he said. Your men will wait till you have finished. My miserable 30 stood like wineskins glistening in the hot sun, and Maximus led us to where his people had set a meal. Himself he mixed the wine. A year from now, he said, you will remember that you have sat with the Emperor of Britain and Gaul. Yes, said the Pater, you can drive 2 mules, Gaul and Britain. 5 years hence you will remember that you have drunk. He passed me the cup, and there was blue borage in it, with the Emperor of Rome. No, you can't drive 3 mules, they will tear you in pieces, said my father, and you on the wall among the heather will weep because your notion of justice was more to you than the favour of the Emperor of Rome. I sat quite still. One does not answer a general who wears the purple. I am not angry with you, he went on. I owe too much to your father. You owe me nothing but advice that you never took, said Pater. To be unjust to any of your family. I owe too much to your father to be unjust to any of your family. Indeed, I say you may make a good tribune, but so far as I am concerned, on the wall you will live, and on the wall you will die, said Maximus. Very like, said my father, but we shall have the Picts and their friends breaking through before long. You cannot move all troops out of Britain to make you emperor and expect the north to sit quiet. I follow my destiny, said Maximus. Follow it then, said my father, pulling up a fern root, and die as Theodosius died. Remember, the father said a few paragraphs ago, you owe me nothing but advice that you never took. Father is smarter in terms of long-term thinking, not just big picture. Ah, said Maximus, my old general was killed because he served the empire too well. I may be killed, but not for that reason. And he smiled a little pale grey smile that made my blood run cold. Then I had better follow my destiny, I said, and take my men to the wall. He looked at me a long time and bowed his head, slanting like a Spaniard. Follow it, boy, he said. That was all. I was only too glad to get away, though I had many messages for home. I found my men standing as they had been put. They had not even shifted their feet in the dust. And off I marched, still feeling that terrific smile like an east wind up my back. I never halted them till sunset. And he turned about and looked at Pook's Hill below him. Then I halted yonder. He pointed to the broken, bracken-covered shoulder of the Forge Hill behind old Hobden's cottage. There? Why, that's only the old forge, where they made iron once, said Dan. Very good stuff it was, too, said Panesius calmly. We mended 3 shoulder straps here, and had a spearhead riveted. The forge was rented from the government by a one-eyed smith from Carthage. I remember we called him Cyclops. He sold me a beaver skin rug for my sister's room. But it couldn't have been here, Dan insisted. But it was. From the altar of victory at Anderia to the first forge in the forest here is 12 miles, 700 paces. It's all in the road book. A man doesn't forget his first march. I think I could tell you every station between this and... He leaned forward, but his eye was caught by the setting sun. It had come down to the top of Cherry Clack Hill, and the light poured in between the tree trunks so that you could see red and gold and black, deep into the heart of far wood, and Panesius in his armour shone as though he had been afire. Wait, he said, lifting a hand, and the sunlight jinked on his glass bracelet. Wait, I pray to Mithras. He rose and stretched his arms westward with deep-sounding words. Then Puck began to sing too, in a voice like bells tolling, and as he sang he slipped from Volaterra to the ground and beckoned the children to follow. They obeyed. It seemed as though the voices were pushing them along, and through the goldy brown light on the beech leaves they walked, while Puck between them chanted something like this. Cur mundus militat sub vana gloria, cujus prosperitas est transitoria, tam cito labetur ejus potentia, quam vasa figuli quae sunt fragilia. I don't speak Latin very obviously, and I've probably said it all wrong, and I don't think someone who could speak Latin would actually understand what I said. They found themselves in the little locked gates of the wood. Quo Caesar abit celas imperio, del dives splendidus totus in plandio, dic ubi Tullius. Still singing, he took Dan's hand and wheeled them round to face Una as she came out of the gate. It shut behind her, at the same time as Puck, through the memory-magicking oak, ash, and thorn leaves over their heads. Well, you are jolly late, said Una. Couldn't you get away before? Remember, the leaves make them forget. So she's been waiting for Dan, and Dan, in her mind, has just arrived. I did, said Dan. I got away in lots of time, but I didn't know it was so late. Where have you been? In Volaterra, waiting for you. Sorry, said Dan. It was all that beastly Latin. A British Roman song, and this will be to finish the chapter, and I'm finishing after this. A British Roman song, AD 406. My father's father saw it not, and I belike shall never come to look on that so holy spot, the very Rome, crowned by all time, all art, all might, the equal work of gods and man, city beneath whose oldest height the race began, soon to send forth against a brood unshakable, we pray, that clings to Rome's thrice-hammered hardihood in arduous things. Strong hearts with triple armour bound beat strongly for thy life-blood rings. Age after age the empire round, in us thy sons, who distant from the 7 hills, loving and serving much, require thee to guard against home-born ills, the imperial fire. And the reference to 7 hills is Rome. Rome's built on 7 hills. And I'm stopping there. That's the end of the chapter. So, have a marvellous time for the rest of your day or night or whatever. And I look forward to seeing you next time. Bye.